Hey guys, Waterfowler41 here, and in today's video we're going to be installing a radar detector in my 2023 Ford Raptor. So, radar detectors are a topic that you can go down a rabbit hole and really get stuck in analysis paralysis. So my recommendation is look around, understand what the really expensive ones do, what the cheap ones don't do, and then figure out what you actually need. And then from there, go out to market and figure out which one meets all of those criteria. For me, the Radenso DS1 meets all of the criteria. So the big things that I was looking for is GPS lockout. So if you drive by a location that's constantly giving you false triggers, it's gonna lock that out after it sees it 3 times. So the DS1 does that. It works across all of the primary bands of radar detectors in my area. So DS1 does that. And then it has low speed auto muting, which basically means you could set a speed. So I'm gonna set it, let's just say 35 miles an hour. And it's not going to be picking up any sort of radar below that. Basically saying, hey, you're driving slow, you don't need to know where any of the radars are at. So DS1 does all that one. And then the last criteria was it needs to be cost effective, and that's what this is. Very much cost effective, just below $350. So in this video, we're going to be hardwiring the DS1 in using the Radenso hardwire kit. I have a add-a-fuse here that we're going to be installing here in the truck to add this harness here. And then we're going to be using the Blendmount bracket. So this Blendmount bracket is made as a direct fit for the DS1 so that you could attach the radar detector to the arm of your rear view mirror. That way it gives you a nice discrete location, but it's also high enough that it's going to pick up any of the radar stuff in front of you, and it's going to allow the radar detector to work and function properly. But anyway, let's get everything out of the kit. I'll show you what comes with the DS1, what comes in the hardwire kit, what this bracket actually looks like, and then we'll dive right into the installation. All right, so we got everything out of the box. So let's first take a look at what comes in the DS1 kit. So you obviously get the DS1. The form factor on this thing is amazing. So that's one of the other soft benefits of the Radenso DS1 is that it looks nice. And it's got a really nice LED screen on here. It doesn't look like any of the chintzy radar detectors, so it is gonna look nice once it's permanently installed in the vehicle. So the DS1's there. You get a cigarette lighter power adapter, so this allows you to plug into a cigarette lighter on the car. So if you are taking this into, let's say, a rental car, you could bring this with you when you're traveling. You get a windshield mount for this guy, and then you get a really nice case. So when you do need to remove this, and if you're traveling with it, throw it in your case, throw it in your backpack, you're good to go. So anyway, DS1 kit. Now, the wiring harness needs to be purchased separately, but if you're going to use this primarily in one vehicle, I would definitely recommend doing this. It just is going to look a heck of a lot better than that thing dangling down your dash. But anyway, hardwire kit. What is on here? You have an external mute button for quieting this little fella down if he's getting a little chirpy. You get the USB-C port, so this is what's going to plug into the side of the DSW here. And what's nice is it's a 90-degree plug, so when you plug it in here, you can route it straight up, and then it really makes wire management much easier. You got a power and a ground on here, as well as an integrated fuse. We're actually going to end up cutting that fuse off because it'll actually be redundant, because we're going to use the add-a-fuse to tie the power into the existing fuse box. So when we turn the truck on, we're going to plug this into a fuse position that turns on with the vehicle, so then it'll fire up the Radenso, so we don't got to hit on or anything like that. But also, again, you get this external mute button, which we're going to mount this somewhere on our dash, discreet, out of the way, but easy to access from the driver's seat. So that is the wire harness kit. Purchase that separately. And then the last piece of this is the blend mount. So what this does, you can see that little hoop there, that attaches to the arm of your rear view mirror. And then this little spring clip attaches to this bracket, and this bracket attaches to the top of your DS1 so that you could then attach this to your mirror, have it up out of the way, and basically have this guy sitting just below your mirror, facing the driver just like that, in a really easy to see area, but also not obstructing your view. But also it gives the sensors a really nice clear view of the front of your vehicle, so you can pick up those radars down the road. So anyway, let's go ahead and get in the vehicle. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna grab our wire harness, and we're gonna figure out where we wanna mount this, because once we mount this, then we'll be able to run the wires, and you get tons of length here on the wires. So put this where you could access it from the driver's seat, or where it's easy to hit that button, up and out of the way. And then what we'll do is we'll route the red and black wire set here to our fuse box, and then this wire is what's going to route up, go up the A pillar, follow the roof line by the windshield, and then it's going to plug in here. But we'll cover that bit in a bit. So let's get this guy, let's figure out where we're going to mount him, and then get with the rest of the installation. All right, so we are midway through our wiring install. So we got our mute button. I decided to throw that right in this little pocket here. I got some double stick tape on there. Ultimately, it's going to stick just like that. nice easy access when I'm sitting in the driver's seat. I took both of the wires, so you have a power and ground as well as your USB-C power that goes to the DS1, and I ran them to the passenger side footwell. So let's go over there real quick. All right, so here are the two wires. We got our power and ground. This is gonna run into the fuse box inside this kick panel, and then we got our USB-C wire. This is the wire that's gotta run across there, up our A-pillar, over to our mirror area where the DS1's gonna live, and then it's gonna plug in there. So, a couple things here. One, make sure you leave enough excess down here so that you can pull the wire up, you get just enough to get to the DS1, and then you can zip tie the excess down in that little foot panel here. Second thing, airbag. You have a airbag inside the A-pillar here. When you run wires by these airbags, run them behind it, not in front of the airbag, because when this thing deploys and the wire's in front of it, it's not going to allow the airbag to deploy properly. So when you're running wires to the mirror area from the A-pillar, run the wire behind the airbag here, so be careful. There is a little bit of room here, and then that'll allow you to get the wire over to the DSW or DS1 radar detector there. So let's get these guys. Let's focus on this one first. You also will see that I pulled the gasket out of the door seal. It's actually a lot easier to run all the wires here. So as long as I get the wire over here, I can run it up inside this channel, and it's pretty easy to then get it over to the mirror there. So let's get that USB wire run over there, and then I'll show you how to power up the DSW wire here. We'll trim the excess, and then we'll get that DS1 installed with the Blendmount. All right, so I have wiring about as far as I can go until I get the radar detector installed on the mirror. We got our USB wire pulled up the A-pillar, just kind of loosely thrown into place. We have our power wire pulled up behind the glove box and then drops down into the fuse box area. I have all these trim panels pulled off. It's just a lot easier to film things, but also just a lot easier to access the fuse panel. We'll get into that at the end of the installation. So right now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go over by our little workbench here. And now what we need to do is install the blend mount bracket onto the DS1, and then the bracket itself for the mirror onto the DS1, so then we can install this guy on the mirror. So essentially what happens is this plate comes in the DS1 kit. It's got a screw on there. They give you the tools that come in the kit. We're gonna tighten that and install it right there. Then on the back of it, there's a slot. That slot lines up with the spring clip. You push this down, slide it onto the bracket, and then you're good to go. And then what we could do is use the smaller hex head screw, loosen this, and then this is the portion that wraps around the rear view mirror arm. So let's get everything installed in DS1, then we'll hop into the car and I'll show you how to install this onto the mirror. All right, so we got the blend mount fully installed on the DS1. Super simple, you just install that clip onto the back of the DS1, and then the bracket itself just basically spring clips right in there. You can see it mounts nicely in there. So now the next thing we're gonna do is go ahead and hop in the car. We're gonna install this guy on the mirror. One thing I will say is when you install this on the mirror, make sure you still have access to the buttons. You don't wanna install it so tight up against the mirror that you can't touch any of these buttons and use any of the DS1 features. So just keep that in mind. There's a bunch of adjustability on here. You could loosen these two guys and this arm slides up and down, and then this adjusts angle. So it's super simple, but tons of degrees of freedom as far as installing this guy. So let's go ahead and get this guy into the truck. I'll show you what it looks like once installed. We'll finish running our wires. I'm gonna talk to you about an added-fuse because I do wanna point out one thing when we use the added-fuses that a lot of people don't really consider when they install those, and then we should be done here. So all right, so went ahead and installed the DS1, and then I just went ahead and also ran that wire. Pretty simple, so this is the USB wire here. I didn't make any sort of final adjustments, so it does look a little cockeyed. And if you're wondering what this bundle is behind here, a lot of this is the dongle for my FitCam dash cam. So I got a lot going on behind here, but from the driver's seat, this is all hidden, so I'm not totally concerned here. But we got a USB wire for our DS1, goes up, I zip tied it to the wire harness to the mirror, tucks up into this plastic panel, comes up over here. I use the trim tool to push it in, behind the airbag, down the A-pillar. And then let's get some light over here. Then you can see the wire right there, pops into there, goes behind the glove box, along with the power wire for the DS1, and then heads over to the mute button over there. So we're good to go there. So now the last thing we have here is our power wire. So we're gonna use this ground right here for the black wire. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a ring terminal on there. I cut the one off because I cut off probably about 5 feet of length on this. And then I'm gonna add the added-fuse on here, and we're gonna go over the workbench and I'm gonna talk through how added-fuses work, because I wanna make sure that if you are gonna install the added-fuse, you do it safely. You gotta be cognizant of the orientation it goes in at. But let's go ahead and go over the workbench and I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so before we do all of the wiring, I wanna talk about added-fuses, because this is something somebody asked me about in another video, and I wanna make sure I call this out because these are super helpful, but you need to be safe with how you use them. So orientation of an antifuse. You got a male side of a fuse here. So this is made to replace an existing fuse. You take that existing fuse that you removed, you install that in the lower position here, and then you have an upper position. That upper position feeds this wire, which is going to be to your new accessory. When you plug in the antifuse, you want to make sure that it's oriented properly such that this left side, so the terminal furthest from the wire, is on the hot side of the bus, and then the right side is your output. You want to make sure that if you have a fuse here, whoop, can't even do it one-handed, but if you have a fuse in the upper position, you want to make sure that when it pops, this wire goes dead. So when we go to install this, what we're going to do is we're going to take, let's just pretend this is the existing fuse in the position that we're going to replace. We'll plug just that lower one in there, and then we're going to take a multimeter and we're going to test the output from this wire. If this output is hot, that means our antifuse is backwards, and we need to flip it and re-plug it back in. Then we're going to test it again. If this wire is dead because it doesn't have a fuse in that upper position, then we know the antifuse is oriented properly. So anyway, just real helpful hint here. Just make sure that you're cognizant of the way the antifuse goes in. But let's go ahead and hop in the truck. I'll show you what fuse position I'm using, and then we'll finish up the wiring. Alrighty, so wiring is done. You can see my antifuse right there. It was a 15 amp circuit that I tied into. Again, double check that your orientation of your antifuse is proper. I use my multimeter here to make sure that when I plugged this thing in and had a fuse in the lower position, there was no power on this wire without a fuse in that. And that made sure that the orientation does point towards the front of the vehicle. Anyway, fuse position, I believe that is fuse position 36. But that is a switch lead, meaning when I turn my truck on, this one gets power. So the power for the DS1's tied in there. And then I had a change in plans. Originally, I was going to run that power into this ground, but instead I went up to that ground right there, which is the ground for my F-150 LEDs. It was just easy, and I also wanted to clean it up, so I just took advantage of everything. So I'm going to put all the trim pieces back in. I'm going to use this little section right here to pull any of the excess, and then just zip tie up everything, clip the zip ties, and then we're good to go to start playing with the DS1. The other thing I do still need to do is tighten down everything, but once I sit down in the driver's seat, that way I'll be able to orient everything where I want it, and then I'll tighten everything down with the tools that came in the Blendmount kit. But let's clean up everything, and then let's go play around with the DS1, and then what I'm gonna do is drive around with it for a few weeks here, and then we'll film kind of the second part of this video, which is actually how to use it. Installation's complete. We got the DS1 mounted on the Blendmount, got the Blendmount kind of tucked up nicely up against the mirror, but again, it leaves me plenty of room for my fingers to hit the buttons, and there's 4 buttons up on top of the DS1 that you want to have access to. The side ones are volume, so volume up on the right, volume down on the left. Power is the back middle one, and then enter and menu is the front middle one, and I'll show you how to use that in a second. And then we got our mute button installed right inside here. I just have some double stick tape holding it in there. It's really nice. I've used that quite a bit, particularly with K-band warnings, because I feel like you get more false alarms with that one. Anyway, if we go to turn the truck on, you can see the Radenso DS1 does turn on, so we're perfect. We're good to go there. I have the truck outside of the garage because I wanted to show you what it shows when you connect to the GPS. So if I want to go through the menus, I'm going to hit the middle button that's closest to me. And then what that'll do is allow me to go through each of these options here. And then you use the side buttons to navigate through each of the menus. So inside user preference, this is where you can go in and set some of the larger things. So auto speed set, you could turn voice on and off. Frequency display, when the frequencies are detected, it'll display those. I have everything right now set as default. If you want to go back to the main menu, you just hold that middle front button and it'll take you right back. So if you're in the main menu and you want to get back to the main screen, you just hold the middle button again. And it'll take you right out of that that menu. But anyway, going back in. So we went through user preferences, band on and off. You could turn off the detector for any particular band. I've noticed in the last week around Illinois, Northern Illinois, a lot of K-band warnings that I'm getting are probably false alarms or security systems. So if anything, I'll probably turn that one off or at least reduce the sensitivity there. Let's go to band settings. This is where you could go in and start adjusting the sensitivity. And I like it that you could adjust it by radar type. So you don't need to do it. It's not like a broad one across all, it's individual ones. Again, I haven't messed with any of those yet. Again, I'm looking for a set it and forget it. So that's what I've been using. So under display, we could adjust brightness, display color. So this one was kind of cool. I have it set as blue, but white. Just let her talk. These are all your colors. I have it as blue because obviously that looks nice with the Ford background. And then you could change when the warnings do come up on here, when it detects particularly bands, you can have it change color. I have everything set as default right now. In idle mode, so this is when the radar is just sitting there, not detecting anything, you have a few different options. So you could have it set as scan, where there's this little graphic that goes back and forth. You can set it time, speed, smart dark, or dark. I have it set as smart dark, and I like this one, and I'll show you why in a second here. So let's get out of this menu. So smart dark makes the whole screen dark, but what you see really faintly down here is a little blinking light. So it lets you know it's still on. Dark is completely blank, and it only turns on, or it only shows anything when it's starting to pick up radar. The scanning is cool, but I thought it was a little bit distracting with where this was at. Go back into this guy, and we go through a couple of the other settings here. So inside tone, you could adjust all of the tones for each of the ones. So each band can have its own tone. Not gonna bore you with that one. GPS is pretty cool. So we can have GPS signal. Let's talk about auto lockout, because I've used that quite a bit here. So auto lockout is a nice feature when you get regular false alarms. So in Illinois, we have the iPass, and that's our tollway. If I drive by the same tollway plaza, I get the same K-band warning every time I drove past. If you drive past it 3 times, it will lock out that section, and it'll lock that GPS. That way, when you drive by there the 4th, 5th, 6th time, and so on, it won't trigger that K-band setting anymore. So basically what it does is it helps you get rid of false alarms, and it does it on its own. Every time you drive by something 3 times, that's when the auto lockout feature works, which is sweet. So then going in the last one here, units, this is where you adjust the region. Since it is GPS, you want to make sure that you're tied into the proper region. So I got US here. Then you could adjust daylight savings time, your units, and then any sort of power options as well. But again, I have everything set as the what it came from factory. So a couple final thoughts here. In Illinois, I noticed a lot of the cops are running KA band radar guns, so I make sure that, you know, KA band's gonna have the highest sensitivity in here. I'm gonna eventually turn down K. The other thing that is really nice is red light cameras. So this thing uses GPS to pick up red light cameras ahead of you, and it'll show, you know, red light camera warning on here, which is cool. And when you couple the radar detector with something like Waze or apps like that, you are well prepared. You know, you have a lot of information, right? It's giving you everything to drive safely and to avoid any sort of excess, you know, money that you don't want to spend. But anyway, the DS1 is an awesome, budget-friendly radar detector. Does everything I could possibly need it to do. One of the biggest features that this does not have, that a lot of the high-dollar ones do have, is the arrows. And I will tell you, I do not miss those. I had a radar detector way long ago that had the arrows, and it would tell you what direction the radar is coming from. If you drive on expressways a lot like me, the radars, either they're coming from in front of you or behind you. Do you really need arrows to tell you that? I don't think so. If I'm gonna get hit with radar, it's gonna be ahead of me. And this thing has got such a long distance. I was probably picking up radars over the last few days, probably 3 or 4 blocks before I even saw where the radar detector or where the radar gun was likely shooting out of. So this gives you plenty of warning to slow down and avoid any sort of issues. But anyway, this is the DS1 install with the blend mount inside a 2023 Ford Raptor. So this is probably gonna cover a lot of F-150s as well. Again, it's just 2 wires with that hardwire kit. The USB one plugs into the DS1, and then the power plugs into the fuse box. I use fuse position 35 with an addafuse. 5 amp addafuse is plenty for this guy. And then when I turn the truck on, it turns on. And when I turn the truck off, the radar detector turns off. I will leave a link to this guy as well as a blend mount down in the description. If you have any questions on the DS1, I will try my best to answer them. Radar detectors are a black hole. So if you got questions, it's very easy to end up in analysis paralysis. There's so many forums out there talking about radar detectors. I went with the DS1 because it's the most user-friendly. Out of the box, you don't need to do anything to it, and it's working perfectly fine. Between the DS1 being very easy to navigate through and then the auto lockout feature, this thing I would say is well worth the money. So about 350 bucks is about what it costs. Plus the blend mount, plus the hardwire kit is gonna be extra as well. But anyway, DS1 install. Thank you very much for watching. Appreciate it, guys. Have a good one. Bye.